Boy, come, Bashalan, in the peace, Atele, putting crown on, Byler, her husband, Boy Kailar, come bride. This is a beautiful Hebrew wedding song, as if the angels in heaven are calling for the bride who has been waiting for 6,000 years to stand up bravely and put on the crown of glory for the coming King of Heaven.
大家好，欢迎来到以诺谈天节目。今天我们继续谈雅各的故事第6部分。利亚拉结争封且，流变实体让长子。约瑟加添人人喜，雅各聚财为自家。上几回书我们讲到，两足在利百家的肚子里。我们还细谈了雅各与以扫名字的意义。雅各用红豆汤骗到了长子名分，雅各骗祝福，这两个骗都是双引号，指地上人的眼光。我们谈了雅各双婚。
Hello everyone, welcome to EnochTH show. Today we continue the story of Jacob, part 6. Leah and Rachel fight for the mandrakes. Reuben willingly gave up firstborn right. Joseph, meaning add more, made everyone happy, and Jacob gathered wealth for his own house. In the last few parts we talked about the two nations are in the belly of Rebekah. We also went into detail about the meaning of the names Jacob and Esau. Jacob deceived the birthright with red bean soup. Jacob cheated the blessing. These two cheats are double quotation marks, referring to the eyes of people on earth. We talked about Jacob's double marriage. Okay, let's talk about Leah and Rachel fight for the mandrakes.
好，我们下面就谈利亚拉结争封且。耶和华见利亚失宠，原文是被恨，下同就使她生育，拉结却不生育。利亚怀孕生子，就给他起名叫流变，就是有儿子的意思。因而说，耶和华看见我的苦情，如今我的丈夫必爱我。她又怀孕生子，就说耶和华因为听见我失宠，所以又赐给我这个儿子，于是给他起名叫西缅，就是听见的意思。她又怀孕生子，起名叫利位，就是联合的意思，说我给丈夫生了3个儿子，他必与我联合。她又怀孕生子，说这回我要赞美耶和华，因此给他起名叫犹大，就是赞美的意思。这才停了生育。创世纪29章31至35节和合本。
When the Lord saw that Leah was unloved, he opened her womb, but Rachel was barren. So Leah conceived and bore a son, and she called his name Reuben, for she said, The Lord has surely looked on my affliction. Now therefore, my husband will love me. Then she conceived again and bore a son, and said, Because the Lord has heard that I am unloved, he has therefore given me this son also. And she called his name Simeon. She conceived again and bore a son, and said, Now this time my husband will become attached to me, because I have borne him 3 sons. Therefore his name was called Levi. And she conceived again and bore a son, and said, Now I will praise the Lord. Therefore she called his name Judah. Then she stopped bearing. Genesis 29 verses 31 to 35 NKJV.
拉结见自己不给雅各生子，就嫉妒他姐姐，对雅各说：“你给我孩子，不然我就死了。”雅各向拉结生气，说：“叫你不生育的是神，我岂能代替他做主呢？”拉结说：“有我的使女撇拉在这里，你可以与她同房，使她生子在我膝下，我便因她也得孩子。”原文是被建立。拉结就把她的使女撇拉给丈夫为妾，雅各便与她同房，撇拉就怀孕，给雅各生了一个儿子。拉结说：“神伸了我的冤，也听了我的声音，赐我一个儿子，因此给他起名叫但，就是伸冤的意思。”拉结的使女撇拉又怀孕，给雅各生了第2个儿子。拉结说：“我与我姐姐大大相争，并且得胜， 于是给他起名叫拿弗他利，就是相争的意思。利亚见自己停了生育，就把使女西帕给雅各为妾。利亚的使女西帕给雅各生了一个儿子。利亚说万幸，于是给他起名叫加德，就是万幸的意思。利亚的使女西帕又给雅各生了第二个儿子。利亚说我有福啊，众女子都要称我是有福的，于是给他起名叫亚舍，就是有福的意思。割麦子的时候，流便往田里去寻见风茄，拿来给他母亲利亚。拉结对利亚说，请你把你儿子的风茄给我些。利亚说，你夺了我的丈夫还算小事吗？你又要夺我儿子的风茄吗？拉结说，为你儿子的风茄，今夜他可以与你同寝。到了晚上，雅各从田里回来，利亚出来迎接他，说，你要与我同寝，因为我实在用我儿子的风茄把你顾下了。那一夜，雅各就与他同寝。神应允了利亚，她就怀孕，给雅各生了第5个儿子。利亚说，神给了我价值，因为我把使女给了我丈夫，于是给他起名叫以撒加，就是价值的意思。利亚又怀孕，给雅各生了第6个儿子。利亚说，神赐我厚赏，我丈夫必与我同住，因我给他生了6个儿子，于是给他起名希布伦，就是同住的意思。后来又生了一个女儿，给他起名叫底拿。神顾念拉结，应允了他，使他能生育。拉结怀孕生子，说神除去了我的羞耻，就给他起名叫约瑟，就是增添的意思。意思说，愿耶和华再增添我一个儿子。创世纪30章1至24节和合本。
Now when Rachel saw that she bore Jacob no children, Rachel envied her sister, and said to Jacob, Give me children, or else I die. And Jacob's anger was aroused against Rachel, and he said, Am I in the place of God, who has withheld from you the fruit of the womb? So she said, Here is my maid Bilhah, go in to her, and she will bear a child on my knees, that I also may have children by her. Then she gave him Bilhah her maid as wife, and Jacob went in to her. And Bilhah conceived and bore Jacob a son. Then Rachel said, God has judged my case, and he has also heard my voice and given me a son. Therefore she called his name Dan. And Rachel's maid Bilhah conceived again and bore Jacob a second son. Then Rachel said, With great wrestlings I have wrestled with my sister, and indeed I have prevailed. So she called his name Naphtali. When Leah saw that she had stopped bearing, she took Zilpah her maid and gave her to Jacob as wife. And Leah's maid Zilpah bore Jacob a son. Then Leah said, A troop comes. So she called his name Gad. And Leah's maid Zilpah bore Jacob a second son. Then Leah said, I am happy, for the daughters will call me blessed. So she called his name Asher. Now Reuben went in the days of wheat harvest and found mandrakes in the field, and brought them to his mother Leah. Then Rachel said to Leah, Please give me some of your son's mandrakes. But she said to her, Is it a small matter that you have taken away my husband? Would you take away my son's mandrakes also? And Rachel said, Therefore he will lie with you tonight for your son's mandrakes. When Jacob came out of the field in the evening, Leah went out to meet him and said, You must come in to me, for I have surely hired you with my son's mandrakes. And he lay with her that night. And God listened to Leah, and she conceived and bore Jacob a 5th son. Leah said, God has given me my wages, because I have given my maid to my husband. So she called his name Issachar. Then Leah conceived again and bore Jacob a 6th son. And Leah said, God has endowed me with a good endowment, now my husband will dwell with me, because I have borne him 6 sons. So she called his name Zebulun. Afterward she bore a daughter, and called her name Dinah. Then God remembered Rachel, and God listened to her and opened her womb. And she conceived and bore a son, and said, God has taken away my reproach. So she called his name Joseph, and said, "The Lord shall add to me another son." Genesis 30 verses 1 to 24 NKJV。
这段很有意思，上帝是按照人能显而易见的来描述两姐妹争丈夫、争风吃醋，好不热闹，可其中的爱却是隐藏着的，我们就来扒扒。第一，上帝要让雅各家先生完了，再安排亚当家。所以利亚连续生4子，有儿子，听见心联合赞美，然后才停下来。拉结急眼了，问雅各要儿子，这时候雅各告诉他是神的安排。这时雅各已经知道利亚是正妻，所以虽然常在拉结帐篷里，也不太冷落利亚。当然一开始肯定不满意老丈人的安排，所以会冷落利亚，可他一旦开始连生数子，雅各也开始醒悟。生了4个儿子之后，利亚生育就冷淡下来，拉结就借着使女给雅各生了2个儿子，审判与相争。利亚也用使女也给雅各生2子，万幸与有福。在接下来就发生了一件事情，要知道让神记录在妥拉圣经里的绝不是小事，而是一件大事，这是决定了拉结与利亚的和好，其中的媒介居然是几岁大的流便。
These passages are very interesting. God described the two sisters fighting for their husband, jealous and lively, but the love in these have been hidden, so let's take a look. God wanted to let Jacob's family finish birth first, and then made arrange for Adam's family. So, Leah had 4 sons in a row. Their names took meaning of had sons, heard, God's heart, unity, praised, and then stopped. Rachel became anxious and asked Jacob for a son. At this time, Jacob told her that it was God's arrangement. At this time, Jacob already knew that Leah was his appointed wife, so although he was often in Rachel's tent, he did not neglect Leah, otherwise where these sons came from. Of course, he was definitely dissatisfied with the arrangement of his father-in-law at first, so he would ignore Leah at first, but once she started to have several children, Jacob also began to wake up. After 4 sons were born, Leah's fertility became cold, and Rachel, through her maid, bore 2 sons to Jacob, named as to judge and contend. Leah also used a maid, and also bore 2 sons to Jacob, fortunate and blessed. Then something happened next. You must know that what God recorded in the Torah Bible was not a small matter, but a major event. This event determined the reconciliation between Rachel and Leah. The mediator was actually a few-year-old Reuben.
那时流便应该是5、6岁，他看妈妈很不高兴，因为有段时间没有生孩子，爸爸也冷淡大妈，常去二妈帐篷住，所以小刘便想做些什么让妈妈开心。他听到当地人的说，吃了风茄就能生育，就去田间找风茄。这东西很宝贵，就像野山参那样稀有，所以当他找到一颗大的，就高高兴兴地拿来给妈妈看。这时让拉结看见了，也想要。利亚就发火了，好好数落了拉结一顿。要知道，虽然姐妹相争，但还是客客气气，让姐姐如此生气，实在让拉结吃惊。再看着这小流便的天真，居然也卷进了相争。他这时开始醒悟，从此不再独霸雅各，而是常常让雅各去那帐篷。这就是为什么从此再也没有姐妹相争的描述，也没有姐妹拌嘴，直到生命结束。而这风茄与流便就是媒介。不过流便心甘情愿给拉结的，可不只是一个小小风茄，而是自己长子名分。我们下面来看看。
At that time, Reuben should have been just 5 or 6 years old. He was very unhappy when he saw his mother was sad, because she didn't have a child for a while, and his father was indifferent to his mother and nice to Rachel. He heard the local people said that if someone ate mandrakes, she could give birth, so he went to the field to find mandrakes. This plant was very precious, as rare as wild ginseng, so when he found a big one, he happily showed it to his mother, and Rachel saw it and wanted it too. Leah got angry and scolded Rachel badly. You must note that although the sisters were fighting, they were still polite, and making Leah so angry really surprised Rachel. Looking at the innocence of this little Reuben, she was also deeply involved in the fight. At this time, she began to wake up, and since then instead of dominating Jacob, she let Jacob go to Leah's tent more often. That's why, from then on, there were no descriptions of sisters fighting and no bickering, until the end of life. And the mandrakes were the medium to repair relationship. However, what Reuben willingly gave to Rachel was not just to plant mandrakes, but his eldest son, the firstborn right. Let's take a further look.
丰前的希伯来文是，据说谁吃了这植物就能生育。这个字可了不得，如果我们知道里面是一个大卫，所以小刘便递给拉结的是大卫王的名分。长子名分有3样：君王、祭司加双倍的祝福。最终雅各把祭司给老三，立位，心，上帝的心，联合的心，而君王给了犹大，赞美。最后双份给了次王约瑟，也是亚当家的王，给了亚当家。所以今天我们亚当家几十亿人繁荣昌盛，千万要记住是雅各的祝福，也与小刘变得大度有关。如果刘辩不让出，上帝是不会把这些从他怀里夺去的。不过上帝也很祝福刘辩，在卖约瑟的事上，刘辩一点也没做错，所以要不是上帝把他支开，卖约瑟的事就成不了。基督徒从雅各的祝福常诠释为，刘辩失去长子名分是因为他与拉结使女上了床，有一腿。实际上这是完全错误的诠释。亚沙尔书里记载，拉结死后，刘辩见父亲还是住在拉结帐篷里，就把雅各在帐篷里的床搬了出去，这就是雅各说的污秽了我的榻。当时把床搬出去是很不吉利的，但绝不会因此而失去长子名分。
The Hebrew word for wind is, and whoever eats this plant would give birth David, the title of king. There are 3 aspects of birthright, king, priest, and double blessing. In the end Jacob gave the priest to the 3rd child, Levi, the heart of God, the heart of unity. And gave the king right to Judas, the praise. Lastly, Jacob gave the double portion to the 2nd king Joseph, who was also the king of the Adam family. Today, our family of 70 billion people is prosperous. We must remember that blessing originally belongs to Jacob, and it was also related to the generosity of Reuben. If Reuben had not given up, God would not have taken them away from Reuben's arms. However, God also blessed Reuben heavily. Reuben did nothing wrong in selling of Joseph, so if God hadn't taken Reuben away, it would have been impossible to sell Joseph. From the scripture, Christian often interpreted that Reuben lost firstborn right due to his adultery. This is completely wrong. The book of Jasher showed us, the main problem was that Reuben saw that after Rachel died, his father was still stayed in Rachel's tent, and indifferent to his mother Leah. He went into Rachel's tent and moved his bed outside the tent. This is what Jacob said about defilement of my bed. It was very unlucky to move someone's bed out at that time, but had nothing to do with adultery. It was so serious that Reuben still lost his birthright, but not so in our society now that he should keep his birthright now.
刘辩是自己心甘情愿地献出长子名分的，他的动作就是把封茄送给拉结，所以拉结的孩子约瑟就顺理成章地成了王，亚当家的王，次王，而犹大是正王，也是大卫最终的位置。也许人会说，一个几岁大的孩子能有如此心计？人的灵从人一生下来就不是几岁大，而是有渊源的历史。人死后灵却把这辈子都经历都带回去，其他都丢在这世界。所以虽然孩子小时显一时空白一片，但对顺着冥冥之中去做的人， 他的灵却知道得清清楚楚自己每一个动作的意义。所以流便就是在缔封节时，他的灵明明白白地告诉父神，他愿意用长子名分去换母亲的幸福，这才有上帝最终把长子的祝福分给众弟兄。流便的举动也感动了拉结，虽然当时还没有人知道大卫是谁，所以不会有我们今天的领受，但孩子关心母亲的天真可爱打动了拉结，所以他把雅各让给了利亚，就是这一让，上帝就开始准备好拉结生育，生约瑟王。所以爱中最终彼此得益处，得祝福。
Reuben was the one who gave up the birthright in his own will, and his action was to give the mandrakes to Rachel, so Rachel's child, Joseph, became the king of Adam's house, the second king, and Judah the righteous king, and David is on the first king position. Audience may say, how can a young child make so important commitment? Well, the human spirit was far older than his flesh. After a person dies, the spirit took back all the experiences of this life, and everything else is left in this world. Therefore, even though the child's consciousness was completely blank when he was young, his spirit knew clearly the meaning of every action he made to those who were around him. Therefore, when Reuben was handing the mandrakes, his spirit clearly told God the Father that he was willing to use the birthright in exchange for his mother's happiness. Only then did God finally distribute the blessing of the firstborn among the brothers. Reuben's actions also touched Rachel. Although no one knew who David was at that time, so it wouldn't have what we have today, but the child's innocence and loveliness of caring about his mother moved Rachel, so she gave Jacob back to Leah. After that, God began to prepare Rachel to give birth to King Joseph. Therefore, in love, each other will benefit and be blessed in the end.
还有一个最重要的原因，拉结不生育，与利亚无关，那就是亚当家6位王，亚当、以诺、以利亚、约瑟、马土撒拉与挪亚，最终领头的亚当失落了。而雅各的6位非利亚生的儿子，老大是但，审判的意思，最终也是失落。你去读启示录，里面没有但，所以如果是上帝不拦阻拉结生育，大儿子最终就是失落的结局，因为真篇妥拉都是反反复复谈真以色列家6个儿子与亚当家6王的故事，每次讲这故事都是同样的结局，老大失落，这样就能把信息传递给我们。约瑟的名字是加添的意思，所以啥事都是加倍。约瑟做王80年，是大卫的1倍，也是摩西的1倍。这就告诉我们，上帝对亚当家的祝福都是比以色列家加倍的，就像对以扫的祝福总是加倍于雅各，这样的安排才最终让亚当家的失落者哑口无言。
There is also one of the most important reasons for Rachel to be infertility, which has nothing to do with Leah. There are 6 important kings of Adam's family: Adam, Enoch, Elijah, Joseph, Methuselah, and Noah, and Adam, who was the eldest one, but final lost. Jacob had 6 sons, other from Leah, and the eldest was Dan, the meaning of judgment, and he will be also lost in the end doomsday. If you read the book of Revelation, there are no doubt about the loss of Dan. So, if God did not stop Rachel from first to give birth, the eldest son will end up being lost for Rachel. There are 6 sons of the true house of Israel, the 6 sons of the house of Adam. Every time this story is told in Torah, it had the same ending. The first one was lost, so that this fixed message can be passed on to us, and in other words, we can recognize this. Joseph's name means adding, so everything is double. Joseph was king for 80 years, twice as long as David and twice as long as Moses. This tells us that God's blessings to Adam's family are doubled compared to his blessing to Israel, just as Esau received blessings were always doubled to what Jacob received. This arrangement finally made the lost people of Adam's family speechless in front of judgment. The next verse is Jacob gathering wealthy.
接下来经文就是雅各聚财。 拉结生约瑟之后，雅各对拉班说：“请打发我走，叫我回到我本乡本土去。请你把我服侍你所得的妻子和儿女给我，让我走。我怎样服侍你，你都知道。”拉班对他说：“我若在你眼前蒙恩，请你仍与我同住，因为我已算定，耶和华赐福与我是为你的缘故。”又说：“请你定你的工价，我就给你。”雅各对他说：“我怎样服侍你，你的牲畜在我手里怎样，是你知道的。我未来之先，你所有的很少，现今却发大众多。耶和华随我的脚步赐福于你。如今我什么时候才为自己兴家立业呢？”拉班说：“我当给你什么呢？”雅各说：“什么你也不必给我，只有一件事，你若应承，我便仍旧牧放你的羊群。今天我要走遍你的羊群，把绵羊中凡有点的、有斑的和黑色的，并山羊中凡有斑的、有点的都挑出来。将来这一等的就算我的工价。以后你来查看我的工价，凡在我手里的山羊不是有点有斑的，绵羊不是黑色的，那就算是我偷的，这样便可证出我的公义来。”拉班说：“好啊，我情愿照着你的话行。”当日，拉班把有纹的、有斑的公山羊、有点的、有斑的、有杂白纹的母山羊，并黑色的绵羊都挑出来，交在他儿子们的手下，又使自己和雅各相离3天的路程。雅各就牧养拉班其余的羊。雅各拿杨树、杏树、枫树的嫩枝，将皮包成白纹，使枝子露出白的来，将剥了皮的枝子对着羊群，插在一羊的水沟里和水槽里，羊来喝的时候，牝母配合。羊对着枝子配合，就生下有纹的、有点的、有斑的来。雅各把羊羔分出来，使拉班的羊与这有纹和黑色的羊相对，把自己的羊另放一处，不叫他和拉班的羊混杂。到羊群肥壮配合的时候，雅各就把枝子插在水沟里，使羊对着枝子配合。只是到羊瘦弱配合的时候，就不插枝子。这样瘦弱的就归拉班，肥壮的就归雅各。于是雅各极其发大，得了许多的羊群、仆婢、骆驼和驴。创世纪30章25至43节和合本。
And it came to pass, when Rachel had borne Joseph, that Jacob said to Laban, Send me away, that I may go to my own place and to my country. Give me my wives and my children for whom I have served you, and let me go, for you know my service which I have done for you. And Laban said to him, Please stay, if I have found favor in your eyes, for I have learned by experience that the Lord has blessed me for your sake. Then he said, Name me your wages, and I will give it. So Jacob said to him, You know how I have served you and how your livestock has been with me. For what you had before I came was little, and it has increased to a great amount. The Lord has blessed you since my coming. And now, when shall I also provide for my own house? So he said, What shall I give you? And Jacob said, You shall not give me anything. If you will do this thing for me, I will again feed and keep your flocks. Let me pass through all your flock today, removing from there all the speckled and spotted sheep, and all the brown ones among the lambs, and the spotted and speckled among the goats, and these shall be my wages. So my righteousness will answer for me in time to come, when the subject of my wages comes before you. Every one that is not speckled and spotted among the goats, and brown among the lambs, will be considered stolen, if it is with me. And Laban said, Oh, that it were according to your word. So he removed that day the male goats that were speckled and spotted, all the female goats that were speckled and spotted, every one that had some white in it, and all the brown ones among the lambs, and gave them into the hand of his sons. Then he put 3 days' journey between himself and Jacob, and Jacob fed the rest of Laban's flocks. Now Jacob took for himself rods of green poplar and of the almond and chestnut trees, peeled white strips in them, and exposed the white which was in the rods. And the rods which he had peeled, he set before the flocks in the gutters, in the watering troughs where the flocks came to drink, so that they should conceive when they came to drink. So the flocks conceived before the rods, and the flocks brought forth streaked, speckled, and spotted. Then Jacob separated the lambs, and made the flocks face toward the streaked and all the brown in the flock of Laban, but he put his own flocks by themselves and did not put them with Laban's flock. And it came to pass, whenever the stronger livestock conceived, that Jacob placed the rods before the eyes of the livestock in the gutters, that they might conceive among the rods. But when the flocks were feeble, he did not put them in, so the feebler were Laban's and the stronger Jacob's. Thus the man became exceedingly prosperous, and had large flocks, female and male servants, and camels and donkeys. Genesis 30 verses 25 to 43 in KJV.
想在今天末世10年发财的人，去好好思考一下，从这段经文你能看出啥？怎么像雅各那样发财？是像显而易见的骗拉班吗？还是有深刻的含义？我们下回书细节。雅各诡计聚钱财，拉班贪心失改心。一人取财靠一路，世人谁能晓真相？谢谢大家收听以诺谈天节目，我们下回见。
Those who want to make a fortune in the last 10 years in the doomsday, go and think about it carefully. What can you see from this passage of scriptures? How can you get rich like Jacob did? Is it like an obvious deception to Laban? There is still a profound meaning, we will explain in detail in the next part. Jacob schemed to gather fortune, Laban was greedy and altered 10 times Jacob's salary. The righteous rely on the road of righteousness for their wealth, who can find the truth in the world? Thank you for listening to the Enoch Talk Show, see you next time.